Welcome to an extra special edition of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. Nominally, this is episode 21, but really, it's a one-off. Yep, in this version of the show, we're flipping things a little. As some of you may know, our friend, colleague, and illustrious Talent Intelligence Collective founder, Toby, has written a book on all things talent intelligence. It's an absolute belter, ram-packed with insight, ideas, hints, tips, and guides on building and running a high-performing talent intelligence function. In the show, we roped in Joe Thompson of Booz Hamilton to join myself and Alison, and we put Toby in the hot seat as our guest. I don't want to give too much away, but in the show we covered off the why and how of the book. Why did he write it, and how did he write it? And of course the what. What's in it, what will people get out of it, and what can they hope to learn? So settle down into your comfy seat, get listening, get learning, and of course, stay intelligent, folks. Have fun. Before we get on with the main event, I just wanted to remind you that this podcast is proudly sponsored by our friends at Stratigens, and here's a very well-spoken chap to tell you a little bit more about them.
Stratigens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratigens.com. That's stratigens.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.
Hello, I'm Alan Walker, and welcome to a very special episode of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast.
Yay!
We'll call it episode 21, but it probably should have its own unique categorization. As here's where I normally say I'm joined by my usual co-hosts, and then I intro Alison and Toby. But today we're doing something a little bit different. Today, Toby's our guest, and we're going to be chatting to him about his upcoming book release. Very exciting. And joining Alison and I to have that chat with Toby, as three is a pretty awkward number for a chat, is Joe Thompson of Booz Hamilton. Hello, Joe.
Hello. Great to be here.
You're welcome. Welcome to the team. This is where I normally, after we've done that quick intro, is hand off to Toby. But we're not going to do the news bit and talk about the what's happening because we're going to chat to Toby and we haven't got any news. So, as I have the virtual mic, I'm going to kick things off. Toby, hello.
Hello.
Let's cut to the chase with the bits I'm good at. Very basic questions. What's the book called? When is it out? And why did you write it? 3 questions.
Has no one ever taught you about multi-questions in a question? Terrible.
Yeah, I know. I'm actually a qualified recruiter. I really shouldn't be doing that.
It's all good. It's all good. So the book is Talent Intelligence, Use Business and People Data to Drive Organizational Performance. It's out, or was out, depending on when you're listening to this, on the 3rd of October. And why did I do it? So I guess there's two main reasons. One was to scratch an itch, just because I had this information. I'd been doing this stuff for a little bit of time, so I wanted to get it down and just kind of make a sensible stab, at least, of putting this stuff down and saying, look, this is my take on the world. TI is obviously such a new field. I just wanted to say, look, this is at least one opinion on what it's all looking like. The second main reason was throughout last year and the year before, there were so many people looking to stand up talent intelligence teams. And, I like to talk to people that are branching out and trying to do this stuff and offer any kind of help or advice I can give. And the last statement after every single conversation, every single intro, every single meeting about this was what's out there that I can read around talent intelligence. And there were some great bits out there. We did the white paper when we were back at Phillips. Malika did that one. And there's been some great stuff. Obviously Alison and Stratigens launched some really good research around standing up TI functions, etc. And there's been a few white papers and bits and pieces out there, but there wasn't really a body of work that you could go to, and it just gave you a bit of a how-to guide on how to do this stuff and what it looked like. There's some other talent intelligence books out there, but it was probably a slightly different versions of TI from what we're doing nowadays. So I thought, you know what, I'll look to scratch that itch as well and get something down that I can at least direct people to and say, here's my take on it at least. Take it for what it's worth.
That's really interesting. And did you? I guess there's one other question from me was that how did you write it? What I mean by that, over my God knows how many years in recruitment, I've always kept like copious notes, links to articles, or even my own notes, etc. Almost a library of them. Did you have that to refer to, or did you start to a certain degree from scratch and brain dump?
Yeah, I wish I was that organised because that probably would have saved me a lot of time and effort. No, it was brain dump. So essentially, I started writing before I knew it was going to be a book. In all honesty, so initially I was thinking, yes, I wanted to create some content to put out there for people to reference people to, etc. But I didn't know whether it was going to be articles. I didn't know what the format was going to be, but I knew there were certain topic areas or buckets of information that would be handy. And honestly, it just kind of spiraled from there, where you dive into one topic and suddenly think, well, actually, to explain that, I need to also explain this concept, and then you dive into that, and suddenly you're going from that into diving into another concept, and it just kind of spiraled out and just kept going. And yeah, then obviously once the editors etc. got involved, it became much more formalized and structured and sensible and serious. But yeah, initially it was very fluid. It was this is what I think is interesting in the main topics, and then just went from there.
Excellent, thanks,
Toby. I wanted to say a massive thank you for writing this book, because I think you're right. I think there was something missing anyway for people, kind of a place to go to. But also, for me, the bit that was most fascinating was that, I've spent a long time in this space, but it's always been supplier side. And so suddenly reading and hearing and seeing the challenges from a client side actually gives you a completely different view. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're a supplier and you haven't yet read the book, do, because I think it's you move from this mile wide, inch deep understanding of all things talent intelligence, and you get a lot of understanding of the application of TI across different industries and different projects. But what the book gives you is the depth of understanding. So it gives you mile deep, inch wide understanding into actually what that project means from a business perspective. I wonder whether that was one of the inspirations behind writing this, or whether or not that actually just happened because of your background.
I'd love to say it was one of my inspirations. I'm not that smart, so it wasn't. I think it was more just reflective of my background. So I always try and be very transparent and true to myself. So I was very much writing this from my perspective, and that's probably not the way you really should write this sort of stuff, and it should be much more holistic and well-rounded and etc. But for me, that's wouldn't be true to what I am. So I was writing it from my perspective. Absolutely, I wanted to tie in and get vendors' perspectives and bits and pieces, but it was really around answering that question of what is TI within that internal model. There's a lot of work already out there around some variants of TI, so exec research or sourcing or vendor side landscape, etc. There's other bits and pieces out there already, but it was really to address that internal piece of what does this look like? How does this work? What is it not? Because you see a lot of teams that are stood up that are doing other important work that I wouldn't necessarily always class as TI. And that's conversations we've had on the pod before, and it's obviously in the book, we discuss it as well. But I think that understanding of this is what my take is on the internal landscape and how it fits together. And yeah, I like your call out around the depth, because I think that's quite often something that is missed when you are working with partners, etc. You do the work, but you don't necessarily see how that lands internally and what else that goes into. And it's quite easy, even within TI teams, to think that's the project, whereas in reality, you're a work stream within a program of work, or all that whole project gets distilled into a footnote or a paragraph, and it's how does this actually fit into everything else? And that was kind of the journey I wanted to take people on through the book as well.
And that was really interesting when I was reading, and I can't remember what the chapter was called, but it was a chapter that talked about capturing needs and then getting a project plan signed off. And actually, that when you were looking at what you need the business to confirm back to you before you start a project plan, is as applicable if you're a supplier as it is if you're in-house. I just wonder whether or not that genuinely happens every time. Do you genuinely believe that organisations are building project plans and signing them off, or was that part of the reason for putting this section in, to say, you need to get this confirmed and signed off, otherwise it'll go wrong, and that reflects back on the team?
More the latter, with the caveat. I'm not saying everyone should. I'm just saying, in my experience, when we've done it, it works far, far better than when we haven't. Having that really structured intake, having the really structured project plan, having the really structured sign off around what's in scope, what's out of scope, who the key stakeholders are, what the key deliverables are going to be, etc., etc. That's been far more successful, far more frequently than doing things slightly more fluidly and slightly more laissez-faire. It's not to say that one is better than the other. I've just seen more success with having that structured approach. If people look at that and go, yeah, that makes sense, we should probably do that, I think it would be great for people to try. But I'm very conscious it's not going to work for everyone. Not everyone's going to want that level of detail and structure. For my team, we do it. That full stop. Unless there's an official sign off, even if we've done intake, unless there's a sign off, we're not working on the project. We're very clear about that. That's the mechanism. If people want to work with us, great. If you don't, that's fine. There's lots of work out there to do. So for me, having that structure in place is absolutely vital.
I want to let Joe in now, because the only thing that when I first read the book, I read your definition of talent intelligence, which you and I know has we've worked on, we've been pushing out for some time. Came through the brilliant work that was done with yourself and Marlika at Philips, and it wasn't until we interviewed Joe on the podcast and he came out with a better definition that I went, oh. Actually, now we've got a much better definition of talent intelligence. So, Joe, forgive me. I think you've trumped that bit of Toby's book. So
yeah.
Maybe book number 2 comes from you.
Thank you. And, Toby, you talked about wanting to get your definition of talent intelligence out there. And in your opening chapter, indeed, you start off by presenting multiple different definitions of talent intelligence before sort of coming down to one that you want to use in the book. And I'm curious, as you wrote the book, and even in the time since you went pens down, how did your understanding shift from where you started?
Yeah, great question. So I think the definition in the book is reflective of a point of time. It's a point of time where the talent intelligence world, inverted commas, is confused. There's lots going on. There's lots of people that are unsure about what the term means, how the industry lands, what does it all fit together. So I think for me that definition is a point of time. I think that there's some really fundamental bits that hold true around the level of intelligence you're providing, and it's intelligence versus just reporting, etc., etc. So I think there's some structural bits, but I think the definitionally, one of the core things that I would say is probably up for debate is the name talent. And talent within talent intelligence. I think there are certain assumptions that are made by using the word talent. I was actually having a conversation just this week about using the name talent in a naming convention. And talent, by definition, is something that's a natural skill. It's not something that you necessarily work to achieve or work to gain. You might work to improve, but talent, by definition, is a natural skill that people will have and then maximize, which by its nature then feels like, if you're doing intelligence purely around the skills people have naturally, it suddenly feels a bit exclusionary. And so I wonder whether, as we evolve as an industry, as we tie closer to functions like strategic workforce planning, whether it moves more towards workforce intelligence or whether it's something else once again. The output of the work is quite often decisions. So is it decision intelligence within there? I don't know. I think the definition, as I say, point of time for me, but it's probably going to keep evolving.
I think that's so true. And I think one of the things that I liked was when you were talking about the great debate and where does TI sit. And my view on this, I think it sits as part of centralized intelligence, and actually intelligence should just become an integral part of the planning process. But I can see as you were writing this that your views have shifted slightly on that, and that actually it depends on the individual organization. Were there any other things that shifted? So Joe asked about the definition. I've kind of looked at the views of where TI sits. Were there any other things that shifted as you started the writing process? And do you regret them, having written them down?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't think I'd regret anything I wrote down in as much as I mentioned with Joe. It was a snapshot of a point of time. So I think for where my mindset was at in terms of the evolution of the function in the industry and everything else, I think it was true and fair and reflective. I think it will keep evolving and will keep changing. I think there's I probably want to push things faster than and further than necessarily the function, teams, industry is ready for or wants to go to. So I wouldn't. I think there's probably elements there that probably won't hold true. I think some of the futurist stuff, when I was talking around kind of where I see the function of the industry moving to, there are elements there 100% I don't think will happen. I'd like them to, but I don't think they will. So I think there's elements that absolutely won't come true, but it's more around the thought exercise of, wouldn't this be interesting to explore? I think more and more we're seeing teams edging towards work that's closer to talent management and strategic workforce planning. And in the same way, talent acquisition and talent management started having this kind of evolution towards a total talent function. I think we could see some merging going on there and some evolution going on there. Particularly, you start merging in with HR analytics and stuff as well. But to your point around having a centralized intelligence function, I think that commercial edge is still something I really think we need to explore more. We need to get stronger at and more aggressive with as an industry. And I think that's something that I'd like to possibly even double down more onto. So if anything, like regret-wise, it would be probably not going deep enough into some of those areas and really flesh that out much, much more.
So to keep moving on this theme of, what is talent? What is your workforce? In your fourth chapter on building the case for a talent intelligence function, you talked about a starting point is often that an organization is aware that the human element is their biggest asset and a barrier to success if not accounted for. And that's an interesting term, the human element. And I'm curious, Toby, if you make a distinction between the human element of an organization and its workforce.
So I think there's a couple of elements at play. I think there's the evolution of human resources as the overlay, where for the last 50 years, arguably longer, if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, etc., we've been looking at people as the only unit of labor. And I think as we're seeing industries change and the way individuals engage with work change, we're seeing HR slightly pivot and having to evolve. So rather than looking at humans as a unit of labor, we're having to look much more as a resource management or delivery output management. So it could be a human in a full-time piece of work. It could be giving the work to a software firm to automate. It could be outsourcing it to another organization. So I think we're having to start to think differently around that capacity management piece. And it's not so much purely around individuals and the individual unit of labor. But I think the other flip side overlay to that is I think more so than ever in history, we're having to think about the individual within the workforce. How does that person have the ability to turn up and be true and fair to themselves? What is the total solution they want, the personalization of employment they want? And so I think we're going to see a kind of pivot, and this kind of ties into HR analytics as well, where we're saying we're going to need to see not the individuals in roles, but the skills they possess, not the overall comp and ben across the company, but individual personalized comp and ben for each individual, and how do they want to tailor it towards their needs in their life and their lifestyle. So I think it's going to, I don't know if it necessarily answers your question, but I think there's definitely a changing point where we're having to look less as units of labor, more around the total human experience.
I think that that's a good way to look at it. And I think that that's often hard for HR and organizations in general, because it's one thing to sort of, as you talked about, look at the people as a unit of labor, counting positions or how many of X role do I have. But there's something deeper when you start talking about that individual and their aspirations and how those aspirations connect to the aspirations of the organization and how the values all interplay. So I think it's becoming a much more complex field for HR today than in that industrial age, person on an assembly line kind of mindset. So it's an interesting challenge as you look at even the definition of what do we call this thing of talent intelligence.
But it's interesting because I think that if we join the dots between those two pieces of conversation, the ability to go deeper and harder and faster on the application commercially of intelligence around people and skills, let's just take that, is where the market will end up, right? And we can drag the market there kicking and screaming, and Toby is part of that process, though less kicking and screaming perhaps than me. But I think one of the things that prevents talent intelligence being used at its most commercial is the fact that you're talking about people as assets, and people don't like that. And so actually I'd be really interested in hearing your views on how we manage that. How do we manage the fact that actually you can make this really commercial if you start to think of people as an asset, and by that I mean groups of people rather than individuals, but then you overlay that with the individual values or individual comps and bends or individual whatever it might be. And I just wonder whether you think that's as much of a hurdle as I do.
Yes. Can
Okay.
that be the full answer? No. Yeah, I think it's really hard, really, really hard, because there's a whole raft of overlays where you're looking at kind of hyper personalization, hyper fluidity of the workforce, but then equally, do you want to invest all that time and effort and resource into getting people on board, trying to increase the stickiness of them within the organization by giving them the work-life balance they want, by giving them the career development they want, by giving them the salary increases they want, by giving them the training development they want. But then, attrition rates are still rising year on year, and there's no sign of stopping. So it comes back to that finance question of, do we train the people? And what if they leave? Or what if they don't and they stay? We're kind of in a similar situation where all of this hyper personalization and really looking at the individual skills and individual needs and developments, absolutely going to be vital. Absolutely. But it's going to be the business case and that cold hard, back to the commercialization, like the cold hard return on investment of doing this work. It's going to be, I think, very few teams that actually nail this and can actually look at it and go, all right, this is the return on investment of doing this work, versus trying to have to restaff every 2 years, or versus having to look to alternative locations for site options because we can't staff up in this given location because it's not sustainable, it's not feasible, etc. I think it's going to be really hard to get that as a stable model.
Right at the very beginning of the book, I think it was chapter 2, you talk about the different types of intelligence. So everything from human to geointelligence. What do you think is the most influential in this field, or what should be the most influential in this field?
Good question. I would say there's two elements. It depends kind of which bits you're doing, but OSINT and human are probably the two biggest. Where OSINT being the open source intelligence, and human being the human intelligence. I think open source, there's some really powerful data out there, really, really powerful. And I'm making the assumption here that you've already got data sets and platforms and labor market data, etc., that you're buying off the shelf from somewhere. But assuming parking that to the side, I think open source, you can find some weird and wonderful stuff to both cross correlate some of those data points you're buying off the shelf, or if you're not buying them, to give you some data points. So I think OSINT's really, really powerful, whether that's looking at government databases, whether that's looking at reverse engineering profiles or job descriptions to work out org structures or org design. Like, there's some really powerful stuff you can do with OSINT. But I think human is probably the single least utilized element. Mm-hmm. If you look across even if you just looked at talent acquisition, most talent acquisition teams will be talking to dozens, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people every month, quarter, year. That's a huge amount of information that they're potentially gathering. You'd hope they're gathering. We very rarely do anything with that information across organizations. We very rarely aggregate it. We very rarely assimilate it. We very rarely analyze it. The amount of waste, if you look from kind of a process efficiency perspective, the amount of waste in the process from an Intel perspective at that layer is just vast. It's just vast. And that anecdotal information and that human level information, it is some of the most powerful you're ever going to get. So I think ultimately, the human element is probably the biggest piece that no one's really cracked properly yet. I think teams do it in silos, but not at scale.
It's so interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you, but if I think about where this journey started for me, it was in recruitment and going, well, hold on a minute, we've got gold dust when we're talking to these different individuals. We should be rolling that up and giving it to our clients as a value add. And yet in that industry, there's well, hold on, we don't want to be quite so proactive, because if we're too proactive, then you start to damage the reactive nature that drives the recruitment industry. And so you kind of end up in this vicious circle. And yet in-house, there is absolute gold dust to be had, providing you're asking the questions in the right way and aggregating it. And it's about taking it away from the individual conversations and aggregating it all up to get its power, which I love.
And I do think there's probably a couple of bits that we still have to battle around that, GDPR compliance and data ethics around how you're asking the questions, what you're asking, how is it being stored and collated, and have you got the right permissions and everything else. So there's definitely hurdles to get around within that whole system. But I think as a whole, I think TA generally as a whole, and recruitment as an industry, we like to have this image to our customers, whether that's internal or external, that we're perfect and we've got everything under control and it's all smooth sailing. And it's like a duck on the water. You don't see the legs feverishly going underneath the water. Because of that, we kind of get a bit too siloed with our data, and we want to give the perfectly polished, final shortlist to the hiring manager, etc. But we don't want to give them all of the churn information that we found through the process. But we don't realize that's the stuff they need. That's the stuff that's really important. That's the stuff we should be escalating. And that getting the organization a bit more visible on what's going on under the water, I think is really important.
And I love that one. And I want to pick up on the link that you with silos. I'll do two things. So I actually Googled the other day, is there an animal whose legs go faster underwater than a duck? Because that's how I was feeling that day, and there isn't. So, but I want to pick up on the silo comment that you talked about, because I think one of the views that I think our listeners would be interested in is you touched on everybody going off and doing different work streams and this being a part of a work stream. How do you think people should be bringing all of those different work streams together to maximise the impact that talent intelligence can have?
I'll ask the question. At the front end, when you're taking a project in, you always want to be generally taking a project in from the key decision maker. Who is the ultimate decision maker for whatever this problem is? Who's going to be able to affect the change? Within that, ask the question, what else do you need to make a decision on this? So right at the outset, it could be, well, actually, I'll need to know what the real estate costs are. I'll need to know from a finance perspective what tax breaks might be relevant in market, or whatever it may be. Ask the question right at the outset and saying, great, now we know it. Do you know who we need to tie into to get that stuff aligned? And it's going to be a journey. Each project you do, you'll get to the end and go, how could I have made this land better? How could I have made this a more holistic decision point? So rather than the stakeholder having to go to multiple different stakeholders and getting different projects from all over the place, how do we make this one unified piece of work? And then just keep evolving it. I think I'd say with all this stuff, I wrote an article recently around marginal gains. And I'd say start simple and then just start building out. If you don't have the relationship with finance, if you don't have the relationship with real estate, that's fine. Just start with one project, ask for one data point, and just slowly build out. But I'd say ultimately ask the question. Ask whoever is in charge, what data do you need to actually make a decision on this?
Excellent. So, Toby, kind of semi-related to that, but around success. In the book, you talk about measuring the success of a TI function, and you write about, to a relative layman like me, a fairly sophisticated model of KPIs and metrics. Is that kind of fairly standard stuff and easily achievable, do you think, for a reasonably well-developed TI team? Or is it kind of measurement nirvana, as you see it?
I like to think it's pretty reasonable. So whenever I've gone into organizations and set up TI functions, I've just looked to tooling that's already available for free that I can bend to use wrongly. I don't know if that's correct English, but use wrongly to make work. And so, we used a CRM when I was at Philips that was a recruitment CRM. And we said, okay, well, what can we track through this? What do we care about measuring? How do we track it through this? How do we build the steps and the workflows to make it so we can track it through this? Within Amazon, we use a project management tooling, and we use that to track everything. So I think I think the KPIs themselves, by and large, are all pretty straightforward to be able to track and measure and monitor. Some of them are harder to get the business to sign up to and agree with. Things like measurable business impact value, you're always going to get in debates with finance. You're always going to get in debates with the business. So understanding what you care about measuring. So what's a vanity metric versus a sanity metric? What's nice to know about versus what do you actually have as a goal? What am I going to nail my flag down? This is what you can target me on, but I'm actually going to still measure all this other stuff as well, just to know. So I think as long as you've got some kind of system, it's trackable. It doesn't have to be something advanced. If you can't get a CRM or a project management tool, if no one's got any other systems internally you can use Excel. Everything that we use within all our systems we've done, you could just as easily do through Excel, build some formulas in to track the number of days to completion or the start date, end date, etc. It's all trackable. It's just how do you want to track it?
And do you come across this within other TI teams that they have developed that level of sophistication that you talk about in the book, or do you think you're relatively unique?
I think each team has a different, I wouldn't say maturity of KPIs, etc., because they're serving their own needs, and the most teams at the moment are running. There's no standardized. This is what talent intelligence teams should look like. So every team is serving their own needs. There are a lot of teams out there that a core metric for them is going to be around how many people do they find for the organization. They're still tied into the kind of sourcing intel side of things. That's going to be an absolute core metric. If you're in that world, that's going to be absolute core. Measuring, net promoter score or measuring measurable business impact value is not going to be relevant for you at all. So I think the maturity of KPIs is probably, most teams I've spoken to, they're at a kind of an appropriate level for their team. But I don't think as an industry we've necessarily got the standardization of this is what a good KPI should look like. And it doesn't help. We're also largely sitting within talent acquisition, where the KPIs are ill-defined. What's time to fill? Kind of depends by business function, department, area, company. Everyone will say a different thing. Or you might sit into talent management. Well, what's the attrition rate? Well, are you looking at a snapshot in time? You're looking at a rolling attrition rate. What are you actually looking for? So I think we're sitting within fields and playing in areas where their own KPIs are somewhat hard to nail down sometimes. So yeah, it can be very hard.
I guess the one thing you do have in the world of TA is at least some commonality of language around things like cost per hire and time to hire and all those kind of things. Whereas in TI, again, to me, as a relative layman, it feels like there's lots of different language being used across the TI world, and so benchmarking one TI's team's performance against another would be really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think even within TA, if the terminology is the same, the actual definition could vary wildly, but at least the terminology is the same. I think, most TI teams are still quite new to what they should be tracking and how they should be tracking it. So it is still very, very new. I think there will get more standardization as more teams understand how other teams are working and what good looks like. I think there is some commonality around what, as an industry, people are starting to see and think, okay, well, actually, that's probably an important thing to track, particularly if they're looking to shift from a model that's largely based around helping recruiters fill jobs to a model where you're trying to influence business and strategic decisions. There is some core KPIs that are helpful for that. So things like net promoter score, measurable business impact value, leveling of the work, those sorts of things will start being standardized, I think, as teams try and pivot and change their offering a little bit.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, Toby, when you're talking about in the book about the skills that make up a good talent intelligence team, you talked about the importance of things like critical thinking, creativity, innovation, the ability to deal with ambiguity. Later, you talk about the ability to work with flair. And those are all, the so-called soft skills, but most hiring assessments, tools, even, recruiters are often geared toward technical or hard skills. So what advice would you give TI teams on how to assess for those key soft skills, like the ability to deal with ambiguity and flair and creativity?
It's a hard one to answer because I'm probably still struggling with that myself. If I'm going to be honest with you, I think it's really hard. I think it's really, really hard. I think it doesn't help that a lot of the education systems aren't necessarily creating individuals that are having a lot of the soft skills we need as an organization. I think there are certain jobs job histories you can look at where people will have more of the skill set than others. As you mentioned, TA doesn't necessarily always drive the sort of creativity and the sort of inquisitive nature that we will necessarily look for in TI. I think, like any soft skill, it's just looking for examples in not necessarily previous work, but previous life. What are they interested in? How do they explore that interest? What are they doing around that? We've had on the podcast before with Kim around the fact that a vast majority of TI people seem to be within creative interests. So they may have done music degrees, or they may be an artist, or they may have this creative outlet. I think there's certain fundamentals around that's quite interesting and worth exploring. Equally, I think kind of around that problem solving and digging into problems. It's around that root cause issue identification. And you see that within areas of TA. There's a lot of sources that are really good at digging down into rabbit holes and really digging out the information they need. But you equally see that in consulting. You equally see that in some, exec assistant roles or chief of staff roles or marketing roles. So I think it's that softer skills side of things. I think we've just got to be really open-minded about the sorts of background and really explore it from a question perspective beyond traditional work. Because I think it is a fairly unique skill set we're looking for within TI industry, I'd say.
I've got a question, Toby. Over you've got your Toby. I was going to say Toby's top tips, but they're not called Toby's top tips, which is quite hard to say. They're called Toby's takeaways at the end of each chapter, which actually are really useful. Even if if you only get a chance to skim read it each chapter, read those pieces. I think they're fascinating. What none of them do is give the negative. So kind of what would be the thing that you wouldn't do. And I'm really interested in exploring that. So someone's reading the book, they're thinking about either taking a career in this or setting up a function. What would be the one piece of advice you would tell them not to do?
I'm going to answer this, but it's very biased from my perspective. So be clear on that one from the start. I would say don't tie TI to filling jobs in any kind of way, shape, or form. The TI, the power of TI, whether you're using it as in the book I talk about noun versus verb versus adjective, etc. Like, however you're using TI, whether it's a sourcer that's doing some TI work, whether it's a recruiter doing some TI work, whether it's a standalone TI function, however you're carving it up, however you're looking at it, don't think of it as a mechanism to fill jobs or to be able to necessarily source faster. It's an entirely separate entity. It's around de-risking decision making. It's around setting feasibility of what you're trying to achieve. It's around lots of things, but it's not around filling jobs. And I think that's where I see the biggest tension and conflict come, is where people have got KPIs or deliverables tied to specifically filling jobs, and then they try and almost reverse engineer the work to fit that goal. And it's not around that. It's around exploration. It's around trying to be as broad-minded as possible. I'd say the one thing I'd say, get away from thinking of it around filling jobs, because it's just not that.
Did you? This is a question I asked. I was about to say a proper author. Forgive me. I didn't read that. Someone who professionally writes books is a better way of putting that. Did you hide any secrets in the book that only a few people are going to be able to find?
I don't think I'm a proper author, so I won't be able to do that.
I'm sure you are, because actually that then leads on to my next question, which I was going to ask you last, but because I've said that, what would you put into Talent Intelligence Book 2?
I'd say deeper dives into certain areas. So my purpose of this book was to give a good foundational knowledge and a good foundational understanding, and I've kind of touched upon some of the more, to say advanced is wrong, because I don't think they are necessarily more advanced. It's just more alternative avenues for TI. So when we talk about things like cultural intelligence or M&A intelligence, tying in with marketing intelligence, always on campaigns, etc., we kind of touch upon it in the book. I'd like to kind of explore that further. I think I'd like to explore some of the technical, the data side of things a little bit more, and how that ties in, how we can use data in the raw format, and then get more into that data science element, and how do we play with that a little bit more. So I think there's definitely some more alternative and advanced stuff I'd like to dig in more. But for this one, it was more that foundational piece of how do we get this off the ground? How do we get this started? How do I get this in a comfortable space to then have the space and capacity to explore a bit more?
I'm already excited about book 2. Have you started writing it?
No. I've been tempted a few times. Towards the end of the book, I was writing quite a lot, and I definitely started, I think, forming a habit of writing. So when I stopped, it definitely had I had a bit of an itch, and hence why I wrote an article recently on marginal gains, because I had that itch a little bit just to write something again. So I think it will be a little while before I write number 2, but I think it's probably bubbling there somewhere.
So on that note, in your book, you talk about the importance of doing a post-project wash-up every time. And I'm curious, Toby, what's in your post-publication wash-up log?
I think there's a few things. I think there's some bits for me, some learnings around how to engage with editorial teams and the actual process of writing a book. What comes post writing the book? There's lots of stuff there that I wasn't prepared for, and I wasn't set up for. I think the actual process of writing a book as well, the time, the effort, the dedication and focus. I think one of the elements that it's going to sound rather obscure, but I think if I was going to write another book again, I think I'd probably take a chunk of time off, fully dedicate to writing the book, and write it in a different location, which sounds like an odd thing. I know, you often see more creative writers doing this in movies and stuff, off to the mountains or wherever to write their book. But I think that alternative location, even if it's 5 minutes down the road in a coffee shop or in the wherever, I think that gives a different creative feel and it opens a more open perspective. In hindsight, I was very conscious that I wrote the book where I work every day. Although I work fully remotely from home, I have a set structure. I have a desk. I sit down at my desk. I have a very, very set structure for my work day every day. And I wrote in the same desk. I wrote the same place. So physically, I think I probably limited my thinking because of that into my traditional work mode. Whereas I think if I did it again, I'd probably take myself away to allow that difference of mindset to have a more open mindset when I'm writing.
That's so interesting.
Toby, who's doing the forward for your book?
Sorry, Joe, go ahead. I was just going to say I'm imagining Toby sitting at the top of a mountain now writing. I think he's or on a beach or in your man shed where you do your other creative stuff. Joe, back over to you. Forgive me.
Sorry, Alison, didn't mean to tread on you. But Toby, what can you tell us about the forward of your book and how you swung that?
Yeah, so it was written by the wonderful Josh Burson. I've known Josh on and off for a fair few years, and I've always been a big fan of his work and what he's brought to the industry. And we speak every so often about bits and pieces, and we were talking about the wonderful world of workforce intelligence and talent intelligence and labour market intelligence. And I brought up about the fact that I was writing this book. And Josh said he'd write the foreword, which I was very flattered by. Obviously, he's a huge name in the industry. I like his thinking and the way he's pushing the whole workforce intelligence piece a bit further. He very kindly said that he'd write the book for me, the foreword for the book for me.
It would have been even kinder if he'd wrote the whole book for you.
I was going to say, could have go through the whole lot. Almost gave away my secrets there.
I also, whilst we're on the subject of the bit that's at the beginning, the way that you wrote about your father, Toby, was amazing. And he would be incredibly proud of what you have done and what you have written. And thank you for making it that personal, because actually I think it means a lot to readers when you start a book like that. It helps you to engage with the person and the individual in a different way. And it was really moving. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for saying so. I didn't know if it would be too personal, but he was a big factor in my life and work life. And as Alan will testify, my dad had very little boundaries when it came to my work and career and my work network. He saw it as all part of his, and we it was one and the same career path. So he had very little boundaries with this stuff. So it was very kind of you to say.
Me and Peter became very close friends.
The Mickey Mouse phone. You let slip earlier, Toby, that you wanted to call the book something different. What did you want to call it?
So I was gonna call it, or I wanted to call it, "Beware of the Moonwalking Bear." Mm-hmm. Which was a hark back to, for a while I was doing on presentations around talent intelligence, and one of the elements was a campaign by I want to say the British Transport Police. It might have actually been Transport for London. I think it was TfL. But it was around being aware and being aware of your surroundings and being aware of bikes, etc. And the way they did that was to run this video where essentially you get caught up looking at these teams passing basketballs, etc. And right through the middle of the video, there's a moonwalking bear that just wanders through the middle of the video. And you don't notice it because you're busy counting the number of passes between these two basketball teams. And I always thought it was a really nice metaphor for what happens in industry and what happens within HR analytics, TI, etc., where we get so busy, caught up looking at the passes, going where we're being told by the business, looking where we're being told to look, that we fail to see the moonwalking bears going through our organizations. So I wanted to call it that. But in their wisdom, the publishers thought that's probably a little bit left field, and not too many people would know what this book's about. So we should probably have a title that's a bit clearer about what this is actually about.
I think it's a good job you had some publishers and you didn't self-publish, if I'm honest.
If not, it would just be me and my mum buying the book.
I think a few of us would buy it anyway, but I think we would be expecting to see a moonwalking bear. And the video is awesome. If anyone hasn't watched it, Google moonwalking bear video, because it is absolutely awesome. It's amazing. Even when you know that it's in there, you still miss it. Joe, over to you.
And Toby, in another forum recently, you posted that you believe we're in arguably the most interesting, challenging market we've seen in any era outside of wartime. And I'm curious how you feel that talent intelligence can be leveraged to help business decision makers navigate through the rocks and shoals of this market.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely core to it. And I think we saw the need for it through the COVID period with the explosion of TI teams. I think what we're seeing now is the retraction of that, where so many of those TI teams are set up within a talent acquisition environment, that as TA is cooling a little bit, which I actually don't think it should be. I think that's a real risk that organizations are doing by cooling off their TA efforts. I think this is the time definitely not to be doing that. But I think we've seen a little bit of a cooling on the market because of that. But I think it is a hugely aggressive marketplace still. You know, you're looking at a time where, yes, the number of vacancies are cooling a little bit, but it's still hyper aggressive. It's still the demand is still far outstripping the supply. We're seeing workforces that are aging workforces within traditional Western countries, and we're seeing a huge knowledge cliff because of that. We're just seeing all this change and transformation happening. It's still an absolute prime market for TI to stand up and get in front of the business and make it known that, you know, that this is what the importance of labour market intelligence and how it can impact the business and how we can really influence things, whether that's, you know, a tough economic situation. People are going to be looking at their footprint. They're going to be looking at their overall org structure and their cost base. It's a great time to come in with a TI lens and say, well, actually, we could look at alternative locations. We could look at alternative org structures. We could look at how our competitors are moving and shifting. And how does that affect the overall talent base that they're looking at? I think there's probably any time of change is going to be good for TI. It's just around positioning and looking at how you use your labour market data to refocus and relens into what's important for the company.
That's so interesting. I've got I thought I'd only got one more question, but I knew this would happen talking to you. Actually, I've got two more now, and they're going to keep coming, but I'll make sure that I only ask two more. One of the sections that was interesting was talking about career pathing in talent intelligence. And we've talked a lot about where people can come into and the different skills and the creative thinking that could come into the industry and be used. You touched earlier on data science and the use of data and how you can engineer data. What we're missing, it feels, is what happens after talent intelligence. I just wonder whether you've got any thoughts on where you think people can go.
Yes, I think there's two elements. There's the people that want to keep pushing the envelope within talent intelligence and standing up new functions and standing up new teams and the growth, etc. that way, which I think it's happening. You know, you're seeing lots of new teams being stood up, but it's still relatively small. You know, it's still relatively small field compared to any other HR function. It's still a small playing field. So getting any kind of management roles is hard. Getting leadership roles is hard. But growing that way it's going to be tough, and we're going to have to forge our own paths. We're going to have to forge our own careers and challenge businesses and grow functions, and that's going to be what I think is going to be a big thing for the next 5 years. Is really pushing those teams to develop and expand and get investment into them. I think the other route is individuals that are probably more transient. So they don't want to be in TI forever, but it's how do we use the skill sets developed within TI and pivot into other areas. And I think there's lots of different areas you can pivot into, with it purely within HR, having this sort of holistic lens and having this commercial mindset. It's going to be able to lend you to going into a strategic workforce planning, or lend you into being a very commercial minded HR business partner. Obviously, there's some technical elements depending on your skill set. You can go into comp and bends and the comp leveling side of things. Equally, we see people that use the relationships and the insights that they have to pivot into, say, strategy, and working with the strategy teams for M&A and having ring-fenced headcount, bring them into the team. That's a route forward. I think there's quite a few different career paths, but a lot of it depends on the organization. If you're an organization that looks at you as a skill, then I think it's very easy to pivot and transfer, because the skill set you end up with from TI, I think, is quite broad, and it's quite a broad, commercially minded skill set, which can be leveraged in a number of functions. If you're in an organization that sees you as a job type, I think it's harder, because you're going to be sitting in a job code or a job family that could be recruitment, or it could be HR, or it could be program management, or etc. If you're stuck within job families, I think that will limit a little bit more in terms of the thinking. But I think it opens up a lot of different career paths.
I can already, and I was going to say with dread, but it isn't with dread. When we first started talking, and you said, would Stratigens do the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast? And I went, yeah, of course we would. And then that kind of morphed a little bit, and we got the Talent Intelligence Awards, and then it morphed again, and we've pulled Alan really on the journey. We've got the Talent Intelligence Jamboree. I'm beginning to think that the Talent Intelligence University course is not that far around the corner, and that you should be writing some of the course content. So there we are. After book 2, that's it. Last question.
I'm not going to lie. That was the third reason I wrote the book. Was when I originally was looking at what I was going to do, it was either going to be creating a learning course and an accreditation for the industry, or write the book. And I realized they were kind of they weren't mutually exclusive. One feeds into the other. To write the course, you have to write the course curriculum. If you're writing the book, a byproduct could and should be a training. So watch your space. The Talent Intelligence Institute may well be on the road path.
I think you'd look lovely in tweed, Toby. Leather elbows on your jacket. Absolutely.
He's already got them, and I've got one more. And I know you want us to wrap, because we're on the edge of where we need to go. But I've just got one more question, which is a bit of a daft question actually. But I think Toby is one of the most humble people I think I've ever met, and in this space is also very humble, and that's just one of the reasons why people engage with you, alongside your depth of knowledge. I hope there are lots of people who have pre-ordered it. I would be gobsmacked if they haven't, but I can guarantee it's more than yourself and your mum. And for me, I'm absolutely certain the book will be a success. But my last slightly daft question, given how humble you are you going to read your own book reviews?
I will, but probably only the negative ones. Because I'll read the negative ones. Going back to Joe's question around like the post-project analysis and the post-mortem, I'll probably read the negative ones to see what I need to improve for next time. I probably won't do very well at reading the positive ones, because I'll just feel a bit self-gratuitous. I wouldn't like that. But the negative ones, I'll be all over them.
Fool, Alan.
Well, there we go. I think you should read some of the positive ones, Toby. Balance is important. And if just so you know, my mum's going to buy the book as well. I'm not. I still expect my free edition, but my mum will buy it just to kind of balance the numbers.
I bought 4.
Have you?
Yes, I have. I bought them for the team. I think it's brilliant. I think I've got one for each kind of department in the team. I think because actually, speaking very genuinely, without me just saying I've bought 4, this is an awesome book. You should be incredibly proud of it. The detail, the information, the practical tips, the takeaways. are really, really important for anyone who's kind of either looking at the world of TI or in the world of TI. And in that, I'm particularly including business leaders. You talked, Toby, about the title that you didn't like, but using business and people data to drive organizational performance is absolutely spot on. And so if you're a business leader, this is a great way of driving your organizational performance.
Absolutely. But folks, I'm going to be the stick in the mud. I'm going to call time, as I often do at the end of these podcasts.
Before you call time, can I just jump in very quickly? And I don't normally jump in. I just want to say thank you to you guys, because all of this wouldn't have been possible without all of you. But also thank you to so many in the industry. So the book, I've been talking about it as if I wrote it. Yes, I wrote it, but there was a hell of a lot of people that helped and contributed and did readings through it and added sections, etc. So from my perspective, it might be my name on it, but there's a hell of a lot of the TI industry that have been involved in this. And a big thank you to everyone that's been involved, because it really wouldn't have got over the line without everyone.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the brilliant thing is, Toby, you've just had a chance to practice your Oscar speech when your book gets turned into a movie.
Oh, what a boring movie that would be.
Anyway, it's time. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. You're fast becoming a regular of the show. How was it for you? On the other side of the fence, so to speak?
It was brilliant, and enjoyed being in such august company. It makes me feel, smarter. Alison was asking brilliant questions, and Toby is erudite as usual. So wonderful to be here.
Maybe this could be a running gig, Joe. Who knows? Toby, we'll obviously look forward to having you back as a co-host if you're not far too important after your book launches. You've got to be there, really. Alison, thank you as ever. And to our listeners, the usual massive thanks for supporting us. And a slightly different, unusual ending. Please do check out Toby's book. I've joked a lot throughout the podcast about it, but I've genuinely lucky enough to have read it end to end. I've had a preview of it, and it really is excellent, even for a TI numpty like me. Some might even call it the definitive guide to talent intelligence. Yeah. And some might say it'll help you stay intelligent, folks. Thanks for listening. Before you go, I wanted for the last time to remind you about our generous sponsor, Stratigens. Here's that posh chap again, telling you about their fabulous product.
Stratigens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratigens.com. That's stratigens.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.